9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. The HOA president is sprinting across what she thinks is public property, designer heels sinking into freshly churned dirt, screaming into her phone like I just declared war on civilization itself. Stop, you are going to cut the internet for the entire community. I lean against my truck, sipping coffee that has gone cold in the morning heat. Madam, this is private property. My private property. I am building a storage shed. Got the permits and everything. That is our utility corridor. You cannot build there. Funny thing about that, I say, pulling out a rolled survey map. There is no easement agreement on file, which means these cables running under my land, technically trespassing. 6 months ago, I bought what I thought was a quiet house in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. The realtor called it a generous setback for future landscaping. I called it 50 feet of grass I would have to mow. The house sat at the intersection of established neighborhood and brand new construction. Behind my property line, about 200 feet back, one of those fancy HOA communities where the houses all look like they came from the same Pottery Barn catalog and cost more than my parents paid for their first 3 homes combined. For the first few months, it was fine. Construction noise during the day, quiet at night. I did my Zoom meetings, grilled on weekends, lived the suburban dream. My backyard butted up against a stretch of undeveloped land, this 50-foot wide strip of trees and scrub that separated my property from the new development. My deed showed it clearly as mine, running from my back fence line all the way out to the main road. I would never really walked it. Why would I? It was basically a long, skinny forest buffer. I was 3 beers deep into a Friday evening, sitting on my back deck after a particularly annoying day of explaining to a client why their simple change would require rewriting half the codebase, when I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. Saturday morning, I walked out to investigate. The tree line that separated my property from the construction zone, gone, completely cleared. In its place, they had graded flat land and were pouring concrete footings. I walked over, found a crew supervisor eating a breakfast burrito next to a bobcat. "Hey man, what is going on here?" He checked his clipboard. "Parking lot and guardhouse for Riverside Commons." I pulled out my phone, showed him the property survey I had saved. "See this line? I just build what I am told." That was my first mistake. I should have called a lawyer right then. Instead, I figured it was a simple surveying error. I called the developer, left a message, called the county, complete with one of those arms that swing up and down, plus about 20 parking spaces neatly striped for guest parking. "Mr. Morrison, I am looking at our site plans right now. That area is designated as HOA common space, clearly marked on the subdivision plat. Your common space is sitting on my land." Long pause. "I will have our legal team look into this and get back to you." They never called back. Instead, 3 days later, I got a letter from the Riverside Commons. HOA, not the developer, the HOA. The letter, printed on unnecessarily expensive letterhead, informed me that I was mistaken about property boundaries and that continued interference with HOA facilities would result in legal action. It was signed by Jennifer Hartwell, HOA president, and CC would to some law firm in Raleigh. I would never met Jennifer Hartwell, but I already didn't like her. That weekend, I paid $300 for an independent surveyor to come out and verify my property lines. He was a grizzled guy named Chuck, who had been surveying land in Mecklenburg County since before I was born. Chuck walked the property with his equipment, checked against county records, then showed me his findings. Property line runs exactly where your deed says it does. That guardhouse, about 15 feet onto your land. Parking lot, completely on your parcel. So what do? Get a lawyer. This is gonna get messy. He was right. I hired a property attorney named Bill Chen, mid-40s, ran a small practice focused on real estate disputes. His office smelled like old law books and fresh coffee. He listened to my story, reviewed my documents, and leaned back in his chair. "Okay, here is the situation. You absolutely own that land. The HOA built on your property without permission, which is trespassing and property damage. You have grounds to demand they remove everything and restore the land. Great, let's do that. Hold on. It is not that simple. They are going to argue they built in good faith based on their development plans. They will claim the developer told them it was common space. They will try to force an easement settlement. and they will make your life hell in the process. So what is the play? Bill smiled. We send a very polite letter explaining that they are trespassing. Give them 30 days to remove their structures and see how they respond. Based on that response, we calibrate. The letter went out on a Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, I had a response hand-delivered to my door by Jennifer Hartwell herself. She showed up in a white Lexus SUV, dressed like she was going to a country club board meeting. Early 50s, blonde hair that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Mr. Morrison, I am Jennifer Hartwell, president of the Riverside Commons. HOA, I know. Got your letter. Yes, well, I thought it would be better to handle this neighbor to neighbor rather than through lawyers. That is my land. You built on it without permission. I understand you might feel that way, but our development plans clearly show that area as common space. I am sure this is just a surveying mix-up. The developer has assured us everything is in order. I had an independent surveyor verify. It is my land. Her smile tightened. Mr. Morrison, Riverside Commons has over 100 families who depend on that parking area and guardhouse for security. Surely we can reach some reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation would have been asking permission before you bulldozed my trees and poured concrete. That is unfortunate. Removing them would cost the association tens of thousands of dollars. I am sure you don't want to be responsible for that financial burden on your neighbors. I almost laughed, madam. Those aren't my neighbors. I don't live in your HOA, and that financial burden is your problem. Not mine. She dropped the friendly act. Fine. If you want to play hardball, we will play hardball. Our attorney will be in touch. She left tire marks on my driveway. The HOA's lawyers sent letter after letter arguing that I should grant them a reasonable easement for existing improvements because good faith construction had already occurred. They offered me $5,000 as a one-time payment for permanent rights to use my land. Bill's response was simple. The value of that land for parking and utilities is worth at least $50,000 a year in commercial equivalent. Then they tried a different approach. Never mind that it was my land, and they had stolen it. I was the bad guy for wanting it back. The Riverside Commons Facebook group, which I wasn't even a member of but heard about through a coworker who lived there, apparently had entire threads about me. Greedy neighbor extorting the HOA. Why cannot he just be reasonable? One person suggested I was probably going to demand millions and bankrupt the association. Meanwhile, the HOA was using my land like they owned it. Every day, cars parked there. The guard at the guardhouse waved residents through. Delivery trucks used it as a staging area. They even installed decorative lighting along the parking lot perimeter. Each improvement made me angrier. They weren't just using my land. They were improving it like it was theirs. Bill filed an official trespass notice with the county and prepared to file for injunctive relief to force removal of the structures. That is when things got interesting. The water seemed to be coming from the direction of the disputed property line. I walked over, saw more water seeping up from the ground near where they had been doing some landscaping around the guardhouse. Then I noticed the utility markings. You know those little colored flags they put down before digging? There were fresh ones all along the disputed strip. Blue for water, orange for communications, red for electric. I called the number on one of the flags. I pulled up my property survey on my laptop, then cross-referenced with county utility maps available online. The main fiber optic trunk line serving all of Riverside Commons. Both had been installed during construction, running through my land to reach the development. I checked for easement agreements. Nothing. No permits. No recorded documents. No permission. They had built their entire utility infrastructure through my property without asking. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, a grin spreading across my face like the Grinch realizing he could ruin Christmas. This whole time, the HOA had been fighting me over parking spaces and a guardhouse, acting like they were the victims. Meanwhile, they had buried hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of infrastructure under my land without a single piece of paperwork giving them the right to do it. I called Bill immediately. Bill, you are not going to believe this. Try me. Their utilities run through my property. All of them. No easements on file. Silence. There you are sure. Pulled the county records myself. The fiber optic line was installed by the developer during construction. Water main connects about 50 feet inside my property line. That I have them by the balls. That is the technical legal term. Yes, if they don't have easement rights, they are trespassing on your property with critical infrastructure. You could theoretically demand they relocate everything. They would have to dig up roads, reroute around your property, get new permits. Bill was quiet for a moment. How far do you want to take this? I want my land back. The parking lot, the guardhouse, all of it. And I want them to pay for using my property for their utilities. Then we need to be very careful about how we play this. If we come out too aggressive, they will claim we are engaging in bad faith negotiation. But if we are strategic, we can use this to force a very favorable settlement. What do you suggest? Storage shed, workshop, anything that gives you a legitimate reason to excavate on your own land. I thought about it. How about a long storage building, like 40 feet long, running parallel to my property line? I could use it for, I don't know, lawn equipment and stuff. Bill laughed. That is perfect. It is a reasonable use of your property, and the foundation would need to go down at least 3 feet, right through where their lines run. You are not required to check for utilities on your own property if there is no recorded easement. That is their problem for not getting the proper permits. By Friday, it was approved. I hired an excavation company for the following Tuesday. I named Ray, who ran 2 excavators and a dump truck. I want the foundation trench dug right here. I showed him on the survey map. 40 feet long, 4 feet deep, running parallel to this line. Ray looked at the utility markings still visible on the ground. You know, there is fiber and water running through here, right? I am aware. But it is my property and there is no easement filed. Brother, our liability. Fiber optic line ran exactly where I thought it would. Then I called Bill. When they freak out, and they will, we negotiate from a position of strength. You are sure this is legal? You are building on your property with proper permits. The fact that someone else illegally installed utilities on your land without permission is their emergency, not yours. Tuesday morning, Ray showed up at 7:30 with his excavator. The machine was a beautiful yellow beast that made the ground shake when it moved. Within 10 minutes, the first HOA resident showed up. Some guy in a BMW who rolled down his window and yelled, "Hey, you cannot dig there. That is HOA property." Ray ignored him. I walked over. "Morning. This is actually my property." He sped off. I knew I had maybe an hour before this got interesting. By 9, Ray had excavated about 15 feet of trench, going down 3 feet, right on schedule. The fiber line was visible now. A orange conduit about 2 feet down. The would hit it soon. She parked her Lexus diagonally across my driveway, practically jumped out, and ran toward the excavator. "Stop! Stop right now!" Ray paused, looked at me. I nodded. He shut down the machine. Jennifer was breathing hard, phone in hand, looking at the open trench like it was a war crime. "What the hell do you think you are doing? Building a storage shed on my property. You are going to cut the fiber line. The entire community will lose internet. This is construction. I have permits. I hired a licensed excavator. I called for utility locates. Everything by the book. You cannot build here. The utilities are here." Funny thing about that, I pulled out my tablet, showed her the county easement records. "You have been using my land without permission for 6 months and acting like I am the criminal for wanting it back." She stared at the screen, her lawyer brain clearly running calculations. "This is going to cost the association hundreds of thousands to relocate those lines. Should have thought of that before building on someone else's land. We made you fair offers. You offered me $15,000 one-time payment for land worth $50,000 a year. I want the parking lot removed. The parking lot and guardhouse serve 100 families." She hung up. That was our property manager. "This is vindictive. You are punishing innocent homeowners because you are mad at the HOA. I am exercising my property rights. If innocent homeowners are affected, that is because your board made decisions without doing due diligence." She tried a different approach. "Look, Jake. Can I call you Jake? I know we got off on the wrong foot. But this affects real people, families. Kids doing remote school, people working from home. You are going to cut off 100 households. Then I suggest you call an emergency board meeting and figure out how to negotiate in good faith. Because in about 20 minutes, Ray's going to fire that excavator back up and keep digging." 20 minutes? You are giving me 20 minutes to solve this? You have had 6 months to solve this. You chose to ignore it, insult me with lowball offers, and trash talk me on Facebook. Now you have got 20 minutes before the consequences of those choices become very expensive. She made 3 phone calls right there in my yard. I caught pieces of the conversation: emergency meeting, critical infrastructure. I called Bill, filled him in. I walked into the Riverside Commons clubhouse with Bill. The place was packed. Not just the 5-person HOA board, but at least 40 residents who had heard about the internet crisis and showed up to see what was happening. Jennifer sat at the head of a conference table, flanked by the other board members and a lawyer in a suit that probably cost more than my car. The residents filled chairs along the walls, and the energy in the room was hostile. As some of you know, there is a dispute with a neighboring property owner that threatens our community's infrastructure. One of the residents, a guy in his 60s wearing a polo shirt, raised his hand. Is this about the parking lot? So, what is the holdup? They also installed fiber optic cables and water lines through my property without obtaining easements. I have asked them to remove the structures and pay fair market rate for the utility easement. They have refused. How much are you asking for? People shouting over each other. 50,000. That is robbery. Just pay him so we can move on. The HOA's lawyer, a silver-haired guy who introduced himself as Robert Pierce, stood up. Mr. Morrison, your demands are unreasonable. Then, I guess you shouldn't have built them on someone else's land. Our client acted in good faith based on information from the developer. Your client's due diligence problem isn't my responsibility. Bill jumped in. Mr. Pierce, your client has been trespassing on my client's property for 6 months. Now they are facing the consequences of those decisions. Pierce tried a different angle. Your client is engaging in bad faith negotiation by threatening critical infrastructure. My client is building a storage shed on his own property with proper permits. Some thought I was being greedy. Others pointed out that the HOA should have checked property lines before building. A few were mad at Jennifer for letting it get this far. Finally, Jennifer called for a recess. She, the board, and their lawyer huddled in a corner. Mr. Morrison, we need time to discuss this with the full board and our membership. Instruction for 1 week while we work out a solution. A chance to reach an agreement without further conflict. I looked at Bill. He shrugged, leaving it to me. 1 week, I said, but if I don't have a written agreement by next Tuesday, the excavator comes back, and we finish the foundation. Understood. I walked out of that meeting knowing I had them. They couldn't relocate the utilities. They couldn't afford to lose internet and water for 100 homes while fighting a legal battle, and they definitely couldn't afford what it would cost to make me go away. The next 5 days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew they were scrambling behind the scenes, trying to find any legal loophole or alternative solution. On Thursday, Bill called. They are ready to negotiate. Want to meet at my office tomorrow? What are they offering? You are going to like this. Friday afternoon, I sat across from Jennifer, 2 board members, and Robert Pierce in Bill's conference room. Jennifer looked like she hadn't slept in days. Pierce laid out the offer. The HOA agrees to remove the guardhouse and parking lot structures, restore the land, and establish a formal utility easement agreement. In exchange, they are asking for a one-time payment structure rather than annual fees. How much? It was less than my original demand, but way more than their insulting $15,000 offer. What about the restoration work? Completed within 60 days at HOA expense. Professional landscaping to match the original condition. Pierce started to object, but Jennifer held up her hand. If you need to access the easement for repairs or upgrades, you notify me in writing with at least 2 weeks' notice. And I want it in writing that the HOA takes full responsibility for any future property line disputes and will indemnify me if the developer comes after me for any of this. Pierce made a note. We can add that. They drew up the paperwork that afternoon. I read every word twice before signing. They were getting the easement they should have gotten in the first place. When I walked out of Bill's office, I felt like I had won the lottery. The excavation to remove the parking lot and guardhouse started 2 weeks later. The landscaping crew they hired did an amazing job replanting trees and restoring the area. I took the first $40,000 payment and paid off my car. The second year's payment went into retirement savings. By the third year, I barely thought about the HOA except when the annual check arrived. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that the whole situation had been embarrassing for her. and several homeowners blamed her for not doing proper due diligence before building. The best part? About a year after everything settled, I got a call from another property owner 3 miles away who was having a similar dispute with a different HOA. Apparently word had spread about my case. And now I was the guy people called when HOAs tried to steal land. I never became a property rights activist or anything, but I did help a few people understand that when someone builds on your land without permission, you hold all the cards. You just have to be willing to play them. These days, I look out my back window at the restored tree line and smile. The land looks exactly like it did when I bought the house, except now it is worth $200,000 more than it was before. And somewhere in Riverside Commons, there is probably still a Facebook thread about the greedy neighbor who held the HOA hostage. I am okay with that. They can call me whatever they want from the comfort of their homes with internet and water service running through my property, paid for at market rate. Sometimes being the bad guy is actually being the only one who read the fine print.